Thank you, Andy. This is Mother's Day, of course. This is not a typical Mother's Day sermon attempt that I'll be making today. We're staying with the scriptures from the lectionary, which you've just read. And you notice the title that I submitted for the sermon. You've got a friend. If you were here last Sunday, you know we talked about another song title. And here we go again. Jesus said something very compelling in that passage of Scripture. He said, "I've called you friends." I'm going to suggest that that is ultimately profound and that there's much there for us to feast on if we'll do it. The Bible has a lot to say about friendship. The book of Proverbs is filled with pithy, even witty and poignant little statements about friendship, just a couple. Proverbs 17:17, it says, "A friend loves at all times." All times. Proverbs 18:24, "A true friend is closer even than your own family." How's that for a strong statement about friendship? Pretty compelling, isn't it? You might say, well, you know, friendship is something that I guess could fit into Mother's Day. There is a truth that might need to be stated, and that is, you know, some people want to be friends with their children, and there's a truth that comes out of that says children don't need a parent to be their friend, they need a parent to be their parent. But I'm going to suggest that the qualities of real friendship can be inherent in healthy parenthood, whether you're talking fatherhood or motherhood. The qualities of friendship spoken to and about and through in the Holy Scriptures have to do with an in-depth relationship with God and others that should fit into every circumstance. I remember when I got married, and I had to select my best man who would stand beside me in the wedding ceremony, and it was no contest, it was not a question. I had some very close friends, believe it or not, I really did. There were a few people that liked me, and they acted like it anyway. They hung around me some. But I chose my father because in my mind, without question, he was my best friend. I had a relationship with him in which he was father, he was dad. There was no question about that. He was in charge. But at the same time, we had a quality of communication and rapport that caused me to feel closer to him than any other person in my life other than, yes, my dear mother. A different kind of relationship, inclusive and totally invasive in my life. But friendship, I always thought of my dad as my best friend. I didn't have a problem with that. Still don't. I think it was the London Times some years ago ran a contest and offered a reward for the best definition of friendship, and thousands of people submitted definitions for friend. And the one that won, a friend is one that comes when everyone else goes. Short and sweet, to the point. Now what's the old joke about friends? A friend is one who will come to see you when you're locked up in jail. I think this is how it goes. But a true friend will be locked up with you. Isn't that it? Isn't that it? That might be a little extreme. I'm not recommending that scenario, by the way. A friend is one that comes when everyone else goes. A friend is one who's coming in when everyone else is walking away. Pretty good definition. Reminded of the event that happened back when Jackie Robinson, some of you older folks will remember this. Jackie Robinson was the first African American to play baseball in the major leagues. He broke the color barrier. He was the first one of his color to do that. And early on, he faced some hostile crowds. He really did. In a lot of different stadiums. But one day when playing at his home field in Ebbets Field in Brooklyn, he committed a tremendous error, and the stadium just resounded in boos. And he stood there with his head bowed by second base, and it was pretty sad spectacle until shortstop Pee Wee Reese just walked over to second base, reached up and put his arm around him and stood there, and the crowd quietened down and a deathly silence enveloped that stadium. Later, Jackie Robinson would say that arm around his shoulder saved his baseball career and may have actually saved his life, he said, because at that moment, he said, I was ready to quit everything. What a difference. Even a gesture of friendship can make. What a difference. A friend, an indication of friendship. What a difference it can make in our world. Now, many of you remember the Carole King song. You remember James Taylor singing, You've Got a Friend? Yeah, you just call out my name, and you know wherever I am, I'll come running to see you again. Winter, spring, summer, fall, all you got to do is call, and I'll be there. Yes, I will. You've got a friend. Boy, what a song. What a song. The idea, of course, is that a friend is always available. Now, many of you remember Saturday Night Live, the television show, back in the old days when it used to be funny. That's an editorial comment on my part. Back in the old days when it used to be funny, I remember an episode in which Steve Martin was the guest, featured guest. And they actually did a skit highlighting Carole King and her music. And the situation was Steve and this character playing Carole King, who wrote the song, were out on a date. And they came back to her door, and Steve was ready to go in, but she said, no. She said, I'm working on a song, and we just need to say good night right here at the door. Well, he was frustrated and disappointed, and stayed out there on the sidewalk and looked in the window. She was in there at the piano working on this song, You've Got a Friend, working on those lyrics, just playing it, singing it. He's standing out there, and these two thugs come down the sidewalk and jump on him and start beating him and stabbing him and, killing him. And just as they're getting the best of him and they have him down, Steve, he hears the words coming out of the chorus, you just call out my name. And he starts screaming, Carol, Carol. But she can't hear him because she's singing. And finally, then, the scene fades, and the implication is he's done for. And she's in there going her merry way. And the voice of the commentator comes on and says, Carole King was so touched by this episode and the tragedy that happened to her friend that she wrote her next big hit, It's Too Late, Baby. Jesus had some things to say about the implications of friendship in this passage in John's Gospel, did he not? I'm reminded of some other things he had to say about that impinges on friendship. You know, obviously we need to be there if we're going to be a great friend. Not necessarily in jail, hopefully, but we need to be there. And I'm reminded of what Jesus said in his Gospels. In the Gospels, it's recorded that he spent a lot of time preparing his disciples for his departure. He spent a lot of time telling them various critical things, and then indicating, giving increasing hints, and then finally statements that I'm going to absent. I'm going to vacate the scene, but that doesn't mean I'm leaving you. And in those post-resurrection appearances, as we've looked at recently in this Easter season, we've come to hear Christ say to those disciples after his resurrection that he would be with them. Lo, I'm with you always. Well, not physically, but he told them, my Spirit will be with you. And this passage in John really is a part of that preparation and that indication that what he has in terms of relationship with his followers is something that doesn't terminate by circumstance, even by physical absence. What he has involved with them is something that is living and ongoing. Friendship with Jesus meant involving oneself in things that make a difference. That's what this passage talks about. It talks about bearing fruit. It talks about involvement with the things of God. Jesus said, I'm telling you these things that you may know, that you may experience, so that certain things will follow through in your life. One of my favorite motion pictures is Mr. Holland's Opus. It's been on cable a lot recently. In fact, it was on again last night. I caught just a little bit of it. Mr. Holland's Opus is a movie about a frustrated composer who is in Portland, Oregon, who takes a job as a high school band teacher back in the 1960s. He has this burning desire to write the ultimate symphony. And he takes a job as a teacher in order to pay the bills and to sustain life while he is doing that creative thing. He teaches every day, and then he comes home in the afternoon and night and just buries himself in his music. But family life gets to be expanded. A child is born. The child is born deaf. And before long, the pressures of his job multiply, and everything in life just sort of gets very complicated, and as it tends to do. And then he has to slowly realize that, you know, he may never get around to writing that symphony. He just doesn't have the time, and his energy is being drained. And finally, he resigns himself to being a high school band teacher. At the end of the movie, we find an aged Mr. Holland fighting in vain to keep his job. Sounds like current events. The board decided to reduce the operating budget by cutting the music and drama program. No longer a reluctant band teacher, but someone who has given himself to it. He believes in what he does, and he passionately defends the role of the arts in public education, but it's all in vain. And what began as a career detour 35 years previously became his life's work. And he had poured his heart and life into the lives of these young people. And he returns to his classroom a few days after school closes to clean out his desk, to clean out his room, putting everything in boxes. His wife and son join him there. And sad picture. But as they leave and walk down the hall, he hears a commotion in the auditorium. And he goes and looks, The auditorium is filled with former students and associates. His wife has been in on it, of course, and she emcees this phenomenal reception that has been staged for Mr. Holland as he leaves his profession. The governor of Oregon arrives. Turns out this was one of his first students in the band there. And the governor emcees the program. And what the governor said is so telling. She said, Mr. Holland had a profound influence on my life and a lot of lives, I know. And yet I get the feeling that he considers a great part of his life misspent. Rumor has it that he was always working on this symphony of his, and this was going to make him famous and rich, probably both. But Mr. Holland isn't rich, and he isn't famous, at least not outside our little town. So it might be easy for him to think himself a failure, but he'd be wrong, because I think he's achieved a success far beyond riches and fame. Looking at her former teacher then, the governor gestures with a sweeping hand and continues, look around you. There's not a life in this room that you've not touched. And each one of us is a better person because of you. We are your symphony, Mr. Holland. We are the melodies and the notes of your opus. We are the music of your life. Making a difference? Yeah. The definition Jesus gives for friendship is not like being a servant. It isn't enough in and of itself. Friends get to know what's going on. I recall I graduated from seminary. I met a man there, young man there. Moved to Mobile. A few years later, he came to serve a church there in Mobile, and one day he called me on the phone. He said, George, we talked a little bit about various things, but then he said, I want to ask you a serious question. I said, what is it? He said, would you be my friend? And my mind went back to first grade playground when we as little kids would get out there, would you be my friend? We would ask each other that. Would you be my friend? And it just astounded me that this grown man with children would ask something that seemed to be almost childish. And it was so evident that it was an honest question. He wasn't fooling around. He wasn't playing around. He wasn't joking. He said, would you be my friend? And I began to think, well, is there a problem, Is there something going on? Does he need somebody to bail him out or what, But no, that was it. That was it. He just honestly wanted to know if I would be his friend. Well, what could I say? He was an okay kind of person. I didn't know him all that well, but I volunteered to be his friend. And interestingly enough, that friendship changed my life to a great extent because of my involvement with this person. He was dead serious. He wanted to enter into a friendship where he could feel confident enough to share his heart and soul with someone without fear of recrimination or repercussion. And it wasn't that he had any deep, dark secrets to hide. It wasn't that he had these enormous problems in his life. He was just being basically honest about wanting to have a friend. He was new in town, and he wanted somebody that he could relate to and spend some time with in a meaningful relationship. And as I said, that relationship developed into a 30-some-odd year experience that affected both of our lives in a very positive and in a very healthy way. Friend. I want to be your friend. It's a demanding thing. It's an important thing. Jesus said, I've called you my friends. I've told you all this stuff, and I've invested all of this in you. It's about life-changing. It's about making a difference. Plain and simple. What Jesus said he had made known to us about God, life, and living is designed to be passed along. Now, he's the one that came up with the idea of calling his followers friends. And I think we would do well to take it as seriously as I came to take that invitation on the part of my friend that called me that day. Take it seriously. Because it's not just being in the same room with someone. It isn't just companionship. It's more than that. It's having to do with receiving, in case of Jesus, of receiving what he offers and then paying it forward. He said, this has to do with you paying it forward or passing it along, or the term is bearing fruit. Bearing fruit. This friendship with Christ is something that affects our lives. In fact, you know that already, I think, innately, because you're here today. You've responded to some of that implication of what it means to be related to and responding to this lover of our souls who sacrificed himself willingly on our behalf to address the ultimate issues of life and death. Only Christ has done that, and he's done it for us. And he says, you're my friends. You're my friends. Don't you think we should act like it? We should act like it. We should take it seriously. This business of being Jesus' friend, that's not minimizing the role or relationship. I think it may be maximizing